Have you ever walked into a crowded place and, within just a few seconds, your whole body tightened as if an invisible hand had touched you? Your heart beats faster, your head feels slightly tense, your eyes don't know where to land, and all you want is to get out of there as quickly as possible. While others laugh and talk naturally, you feel as if you're being pulled into a wave of chaos you can't quite name. And then you wonder, why do I react like this? Is there something wrong with me? And another question follows deeper, more persistent. Why am I not like the people around me? Am I sick? Or is there something abnormal about me? That question isn't yours alone. It belongs to countless people who carry within themselves a discomfort toward crowds, an experience they cannot explain and cannot control. But modern psychology reveals an important truth. We respond to crowds not only with our conscious mind, but with our unconscious. The unconscious is the deepest layer governing our instinctive reactions, the place where memories, fears, experiences, wounds, and protective mechanisms are stored long after we've forgotten creating them. It doesn't speak in words. It speaks in sensations. When crowds make you feel suffocated, your unconscious is sending a signal. When busy places drain your energy, your unconscious is sounding an alarm. When you feel invaded, even though no one touches you, the unconscious is activating a safety boundary you never knew you had. And this is the turning point in understanding the psychology of those who dislike crowds. Your reaction is not abnormal. It is logical. It is programmed to protect you. The human mind is not a purely rational machine as we often imagine. It is like an ocean. What we see is only the surface. What shapes us lies beneath, where light cannot reach. Your discomfort in crowds does not come from being weak or difficult, but because the unconscious perceives too many signals at once. Sounds, movements, gazes, distances, rhythms, threats, everything hitting the nervous system like a violent storm. And because the unconscious is hundreds of times faster than the conscious mind, your body reacts long before you can understand what is happening. But here, another question emerges, the most important one in the journey of exploring your own psychology. Is that reaction your true nature, or is it simply a shield you once needed to survive? Do you dislike crowds because you genuinely prefer solitude? Or do you dislike crowds because your unconscious learned long ago that crowded places are unsafe? Are you sensitive to noise because you are naturally perceptive, or because no one ever taught your unconscious how to filter chaos? When we start asking such questions, we stop judging ourselves. We begin looking at ourselves with curiosity, with gentleness, with the desire to understand the deepest part of who we are, the part we have never named. And that is when healing begins, not by changing who you are, but by seeing yourself clearly. You do not dislike crowds for no reason. You are simply responding from the deepest layer of your psyche. The question now is, are you ready to listen to what your unconscious has been trying to tell you? There are moments when you blame yourself for not being able to endure crowded places. You think you're weak. You think you're the only one who overreacts like this. Sometimes, lying in bed at night, you wonder whether something inside you is broken, whether you're carrying some silent illness, or whether you were simply born with a kind of abnormality that others don't have. Those questions cling to you like a thin layer of mist over the mind, not enough to hurt, but enough to haunt. And then one day, when you pause and look more deeply into your own reactions, something subtly shifts. You realize that your discomfort in crowds doesn't come from a dark corner of your soul. It is not a wound, nor a malfunction of the mind. It is simply the way your brain works. A delicate rhythm you have never understood correctly. You remember every time you stepped into a noisy place. Everything rushed in like a wave. Voices layered on top of one another. Faces moving constantly. Glances brushing past. Scents mingling. Lights shifting in color. Others see all of that as ordinary, but you feel everything at once, as if someone has turned the volume of life up to its maximum. And in those moments, you once believed you were fragile. But looking back, you suddenly understand, it wasn't fragility. It was the sensitivity of a mind that perceives things too subtle for others to notice. You are not sick. You are not abnormal. There is nothing in that reaction that makes you defective. You are simply living with a more finely tuned nervous system, like a high-resolution camera. In a place with too much movement, it may shake and blur, but in stillness it captures details every other camera misses. All this time, it turns out, you were never the person with a problem. You were simply someone who feels so deeply that crowds become a natural challenge. And from here, you begin to see the reversal. What you once labeled as weakness is actually a sign of refined perception. What you once thought was a problem is your unconscious protection mechanism doing exactly what it was designed to do. What you considered being different is in fact a capacity not everyone possesses: the ability to detect the smallest signals within chaos, the ability to sense a shift, even as subtle as a faint current of movement in the air. You once felt ashamed for leaving crowded places earlier than others, but now, with clearer understanding, that action no longer carries shame. It is simply your body whispering to you, "This is too much. We need space to breathe." And you respond the way someone does when they truly listen to themselves. Not by running away, but by returning. And then, you suddenly understand something very simple. You are not weak. You are simply too attuned to pretend those things don't exist. Your strength lies in your willingness to be honest with yourself, in your courage to walk away from places that tear your energy into pieces. In that moment, when you place your hand on your chest and feel your heartbeat gradually slowing, a quiet, deep, genuine "ah" rises from within you. So this is it, you never had a problem. You were whole all along. Everything only feels wrong when you look at yourself through someone else's eyes. But when you look through your own, everything returns to its true shape. There is a truth you have never fully seen. Your reaction to crowds does not begin in the conscious mind. It starts somewhere else, deeper, quieter, like an electric current running beneath the ground. Your body reacts before you even register where you're standing. And to understand that, you have to step a little into your own inner world, where the brain works in silence. You don't hear it, but every passing second, your brain is scanning the entire space around you, like a radar that never rests. This system doesn't ask you a single question. It simply works. It records movement, sound, facial expressions, the distance between bodies, and especially, it notes sudden changes. A sharp noise, a glance passing by, someone moving closer than necessary. This isn't sensitivity. This is biology. It is the amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for detecting any sign of instability. In many people, this region reacts slowly and lightly. But in you, it is finer, faster, sharper. Just a large influx of signals arriving at once is enough for the system to switch on, not to frighten you, but to ensure you notice what others overlook. Then comes the sensory cortex, where sound, light, and movement are processed. For most people, it filters out excess signals, keeping only what matters. But some brains, like yours, don't filter as aggressively. They retain more layers of information, like a camera set to HDR mode. Everything brighter, clearer, stronger. What others perceive as noise, you perceive as multiple layers of noise all at once. And there is another mechanism speaking softly beneath it all, the sympathetic nervous system. It exists to protect the body from real danger. In the past, that danger was wild animals. Today, the brain still uses the same system for situations it cannot fully predict. A crowd is exactly such a place. Unpredictable movements, constantly shifting sounds, unstable space. So after just a few minutes standing there, your body begins to respond as if preparing to defend itself. Heart rate rising, breath growing shallow, senses opening wide. You think you're anxious, but in truth, your body is simply doing its job, keeping you safe. And something else is happening at the same time. Cognitive load. Your brain is not only scanning, not only protecting it, is also calculating pathways, distances, positions, and the directions of other people's movements, the things others ignore because they don't notice. Your brain records piece by piece to make sure you don't accidentally step into someone or get hurt. Every second, dozens of computations run silently in the background, not in numbers, but in reflexes. And all of this combines into the feeling you call overload. But when you look at it through a scientific lens, it no longer feels like some irrational discomfort. You see instead an incredibly refined nervous system, one so active that a single environment like a crowd is enough to make every layer of your brain light up at once. So it turns out you were never overreacting. Your brain simply operates in a sharper, faster, deeper way. And once you understand this, you begin to trust yourself more. You stop seeing your body as something that fails and start seeing it as a loyal companion, one that warns you long before you consciously perceive anything. You stop seeing crowds as a battlefield and begin seeing them simply as an environment that does not match the architecture of your nervous system. One day, when you walk into a crowded place and feel that wave of signals rising from within, you may no longer blame yourself. You may simply think, this is just my brain at work. So this whole time, I had misunderstood it. There is something you've held inside for quite a long time without anyone knowing. Every time you felt uncomfortable in a crowd, you didn't think you were wrong. You simply thought you were different from others. Other people can stand comfortably in noise, but you cannot. Others walk into a crowded space without hesitation, while you need a few seconds just to steady your breath. That feeling of being out of sync with the rhythm around you has made you quietly assume, again and again, that there must be something unusual about you, something not quite like the majority. You don't blame yourself harshly, but beneath it all, there is a quiet, lingering doubt. Why can everyone else tolerate it, but not me? Is there something off about me compared to them? It is that very question that has wrapped you in a subtle uncertainty about yourself for many years. And then, at some point, when you begin to understand how your brain actually works, its biological reactions, its self-protective mechanisms, its unconscious layers that move faster than awareness, a small space opens inside you. Not a frightening one, but a space of clarity. You start looking back at the moments of discomfort, not with self-judgment, but with a gentle curiosity. If my brain reacts this way, then perhaps I'm not abnormal. Perhaps I simply belong to a different kind of person. That moment doesn't make you burst into tears, nor does it fill you with joy. It creates a shift that is deep and quiet, as if you've finally placed an object into its rightful spot after years of putting it in the wrong place. And once it's where it belongs, everything suddenly makes more sense. You understand that what makes others comfortable does not necessarily have to make you feel the same. Not everyone is born with the same threshold of tolerance. Not everyone feels normal when stepping into crowds. Some people like you, have a nervous system that reacts more strongly, receives more signals, and needs more spaciousness for the mind to breathe. And being different from the majority does not make you abnormal. You simply belong to a type of person who senses the world a little differently from most. That is when you look back at the moments that once made you feel self-conscious. The times you left parties early, the moments you couldn't focus because there were too many voices around, the times you had to step back just to regain your breath. Before, you thought those things made you not enough, but now you realize they were simply ways your body protected you. A shift in awareness is not about discovering something grand or new. It happens when you look at something old from a different angle and realize that all this time, you had misunderstood what it meant. Your discomfort in crowds is not a sign of inadequacy, not a sign of weakness, and certainly not a sign of abnormality. It is simply a natural response from a kind of mind that is wired to feel more deeply, to perceive more layers, and to react more truthfully. And when that truth finally reaches you, you feel lighter. Not because you have become someone different, but because you no longer force yourself to resemble the majority. You no longer see your differences as something to hide or correct. You see them as a simple, ordinary part of who you are. A part that has been there all along, waiting for you to call it by its proper name. You don't need to be comfortable in crowds to be normal. You only need to understand one thing. Being uncomfortable is also a perfectly normal way to exist. That is what a shift in awareness truly is. Not loud, not dramatic, just a small truth, but one powerful enough to rearrange the way you see yourself. There is something that has begun to grow clearer within you after understanding your psychological mechanisms and realizing that you were never abnormal. A sense that a deeper layer of yourself has been waiting to be opened. A layer you were never calm enough to look into before, because you were too busy worrying that you were different. But as that worry slowly dissolves, you begin to see more clearly what has been standing behind all your reactions. A very still, very hidden, very true part of you. A part you have never named. It is not fear, not weakness, not social avoidance. It is a silent self, the one that has always been guiding your emotions in its own quiet way. You start to realize, every time you feel uncomfortable in a crowd, the feeling doesn't come only from noise, movement, or chaos around you. It also comes from a very deep need within you, the need to preserve a part of yourself, a part you don't want to be pushed, squeezed, or disrupted. You may have never spoken this out loud, but inside you, there has always been a place that longs to feel safe, that wants room to breathe, that wants to preserve its own wholeness. Not because you fear others, but because you fear losing yourself in places that are too overwhelming. And when you finally see that, you touch a truth that stings a little. You are not only uncomfortable with crowds, you are uncomfortable with the fact that you have forced yourself to remain in them, forced yourself to blend in, forced yourself to be like everyone else, forced yourself to appear fine, even while your inner world was shrinking, inch by inch. This pain is different from the pain of external wounds. It is the pain of realizing you have not allowed yourself to live in alignment with your true feelings for many years. And this is the emotional depth you must reach in order to begin healing. Because once you see that silent self, you understand that every reaction of your body, every withdrawal, every urge to leave a crowded space was never weakness. It was the most accurate voice of the person within you, the one who always knows what brings peace, what exhausts you, and what pulls you away from your own center. You simply never paused long enough to listen. And when this realization comes, you do not burst into light. You settle, a settling that is deeply real, not loud, not enlightened in some mystical way, but a settling that whispers, I understand, this is me, and I no longer need to fight against it. From this understanding comes the beginning of release, not releasing life, but releasing everything you once forced yourself to become, releasing the need to appear fine in places that suffocate you, releasing the need to imitate others simply because they see no problem in crowds, releasing the need to suppress your deepest needs just to maintain a fragile sense of belonging. You let go not because you are giving up. You let go because you have seen the truest part of yourself and you want to protect it as something valuable. This is the moment you step out of the spiral of self-judgment and stand fully in yourself with no need to explain, no need to ask permission, no need to prove anything. You understand that beneath every reaction, there has always been another you quietly existing. A you that does not want noise, does not want pushing, does not want to be pulled into the fast rhythms of others. A you that simply wants to live at the pace your being can genuinely sustain and honor. This existential clarity does not turn you into someone new. It merely returns you to the foundational version of yourself, the one you lost while trying to blend into the world. And when that happens, you feel light, light in the truest sense. You no longer have to fight against yourself. When you have walked through enough layers of emotion from confusion to understanding to realization to touching the quietest part of yourself, what remains is not chaos, but a very gentle settling, a kind of settling that makes you breathe a little deeper, slow your steps, and realize that you've been carrying far too many things that were never yours to carry. And in that very moment, you begin to see a truth you had never considered before. You don't need to change your nature in order to live better. You only need to stand on the side of that nature. That is the moment that creates a profound shift in perception, a turning of perspective that is powerful, yet deeply calm, because you recognize something sharp and undeniably true. The thing that has exhausted you all this time wasn't the crowd. It was the fact that you were not standing with yourself. You stood with the expectations of others. You stood with the standards of the majority. You stood with an idea of normal that someone else invented, while the deepest part of you kept whispering, I cannot live that way. The crowd simply revealed what you had tried to hide. You have a different rhythm, clearer, quieter, and you had abandoned it for far too long. When this truth reaches you, you do not feel weak. You feel returned. Returned to a version of yourself that has existed for years but was never protected by you. And from here, a kind of philosophical serenity begins to take root. You no longer walk into crowded places with the mindset of, I must try, but with the understanding that I have the right to choose spaces that fit me. You no longer wrestle with your discomfort, but treat it as a signal from your nervous system, honest, useful, and worthy of respect. You no longer compare yourself to others, but see your difference as a characteristic, not a deficiency. You realize that living according to your nature is not resignation. It is a form of awakeness. It requires you to recognize your inner needs and dare to give them a place in your life. And when you do this, something strange happens. You begin to feel fuller, not because the world has changed, but because you no longer divide yourself between the real you and the you who tries. You choose spaces where your body doesn't have to tense up. You choose a pace at which your mind can breathe. You choose a way of existing in which the silent self within you feels safe. And from those small choices, a great peace starts to form. Not the kind of peace that comes from withdrawing from the world, but the peace of standing within the world without losing yourself. You understand that you do not need to become someone who enjoys crowds. You do not need to force yourself into places where your body cries for help. You only need to be honest enough to say, "This is my rhythm. I will live by this rhythm." Because in the end, serenity does not come from how many things you conquer, but from the moment you stop fighting against your own nature. And when you can do that, you enter a quiet kind of freedom. A freedom that does not need proof, does not need justification, does not need permission. You simply live in the way your body, your heart, and your silent self have always wanted from the beginning. And that is the philosophy you must pass through 6 layers to finally touch. Serenity is not a goal. Serenity is the result of no longer forcing yourself to become someone else. When you reach the end of this journey, you may realize something very different. Not the difference between you and the world. Not the reason why you feel tired when stepping into crowded places, but something lighter, deeper, the feeling of standing on your own side for the first time. Serenity doesn't arrive like a strong wind. It comes softly, like a layer of dust brushed away after years of settling on a surface you never noticed. You are still the same you as yesterday, still living in the same world, but something inside you has shifted, lighter, clearer, fuller. You no longer see your reactions as problems that need fixing. You see them as part of your nature, part of your voice that you once overlooked while trying to synchronize yourself with the rhythm of others. Now, instead of resisting it, you listen to it. And each time you listen, you feel a little more honest, a little closer to your true self. You begin to understand that living in a noisy world does not mean you must become noisy too. You don't need to push yourself into crowds to prove you're normal. You don't need to endure chaos to appear sociable. You only need to know which rhythm you belong to and allow yourself to live within that rhythm. When you stand in a crowded place, the discomfort may still be there, but it no longer confuses you the way it used to. You know where it comes from. You know how your brain responds. And you know you have the right to step away without apologizing, without blaming yourself, without pretending to be strong. That is the serenity of someone who understands themselves. Not that you never get tired, but that you no longer fear your tiredness. And the most beautiful part is this. When you stop fearing it, you stop hating it. You simply see it as a signal. It's time to return to my safe space. Healing is not about becoming someone who enjoys crowds. Healing is knowing how long you can stay in a crowd, and leaving when you need to, gently and without shame. And in that choice, you reclaim a sense of agency in your life. Not agency in the sense of controlling everything, but agency in protecting what nourishes you. You become the guardian of your own essence, not through force, but through understanding. Then, at some point, you realize you do not like quiet as a form of avoidance, but as a form of returning. Quiet is no longer a refuge. It is where you belong. And when you stand there in a place where your breath steadies, your mind expands, and the silent self within you feels safe, you understand that this journey was never meant to turn you into someone else. It was meant to bring you back to where you truly are. A place very small, very still, but entirely enough. The final serenity is not that you never encounter the things that tire you again. The final serenity is that you know how to return, and you know you will always have a place to return to. And perhaps that is the most beautiful form of strength. Strength in the way of someone who understands themselves, not in the way others expect you to be.